Apologies in advance that I sound so stuffy and bunged up. Look, I've got a good old-fashioned cold, right? No Rona. I've done 2 of these and they're both negative. But the content needs to continue because, well, today, the day of filming, is the 2-year anniversary from Pierre Gasly being dropped from Red Bull and being replaced by Alex Albon. That was my first video on Tommo F1, actually. That was my first F1 video that I ever did. So I thought now would be a great time to talk about what Red Bull's options are going into 2022, specifically the choice, the seemingly obvious choice between going with Sergio Perez, who's currently in the seat, or Pierre Gasly. Do they give Pierre the chance to right the wrongs of 2019? Because if you ask me, he's a very, very different driver to the driver who stepped into that Red Bull seat in 2019. Since Daniel Ricciardo's departure from the team at the end of 2018, a season in which he won like 2 races, Daniel, so he wasn't like miles off of Max at all. Pierre Gasly and then Alex Albon both were trounced by Max Verstappen. Let's be real, there's no other way of putting it. It was an absolute demolition job. Sergio replaced Alex for this year. We're now 11 races in. And as much as Sergio has definitely done a better job than Pierre, than Alex did, he's still quite a way off. 10-1 down to Max in qualifying, 8-2 to Max in terms of podium finishes out of 11 races, and 5-1 to Max in terms of race wins. And let's be real, Perez's race win came from the fact that Max's tyre exploded. So it should really be 6-0, shouldn't it? And then you look at Pierre, who currently is absolutely wiping the floor with his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda. He's a rookie, so fair enough. But over the last 2 years, like Pierre's renaissance since he went back to Toro Rosso, now AlphaTauri, it's been amazing. He's been so good. So today I want to cover the debate whether Sergio should stay in that seat, whether Pierre's done enough to prove that he would be better if he went into Red Bull now. Is it worth that risk? And I did poll you lot, and it's about a 2/3 to 1/3 split, but we'll get into that later in the video. So let's start by comparing them at a very base level, right? So starting with age, Pierre Gasly is 25 years old, Sergio Perez is 31. Experience-wise, Gasly is in his 4th year in Formula 1. He's had 75 starts and debuted in 2017. Perez is in his 11th year in Formula 1, has had 206 starts, debuted in 2011. Points-wise, Gasly's managed 249 points over his career. Perez has managed 810. In terms of podiums, Gasly's managed 3 over his tenure. Perez has managed 12. In terms of wins, Gasly's obviously got that 1 at Monza. Perez has got Sakir last year and Baku this year. And then in terms of teams, Gasly's had experience at 2 teams, so Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri and Red Bull. Perez was at Sauber, then McLaren, then Force India Racing Point, and now Red Bull. Given Sergio is 6 years Pierre's senior and has had 7 more years in the sport, relative, I think their achievements are actually pretty similar. And I definitely think their careers have followed similar trajectories. Very impressive at the start, so Toro Rosso for Pierre, Sauber for Sergio, then a bit of a rocky patch, obviously Pierre at Red Bull. McLaren for Sergio wasn't great. And then obviously a proper comeback at like a midfield team. So obviously Pierre Gasly at Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, Sergio at Force India Racing Point. Both seemed to struggle being put in a top team early on in their careers, but then had a big comeback when that pressure was kind of lifted and they'd matured themselves as drivers. So now let's talk about the gap to Max. That is the one kind of measurement where you can look at them and I think draw the most from, because Max, I do think, has improved as a driver since 2019 when he was partnered with Pierre. But in terms of pace, outright pace, I think Max has always been at a fantastic level. After 11 races, Gasly missed out on Q3 3 times, Perez only 1. And then the qualifying gap, obviously I'm only looking at this when all drivers reached Q3 at their respective times. So for Pierre, that was 7 races. For Sergio, that was 10. Pierre on average was 0.687 behind Max Verstappen. Perez on the other hand, only 0.464. So there's no question Sergio is doing a better job in qualifying relative to Max than Pierre was in 2019. But that shouldn't really come as a surprise, because obviously when Pierre jumped into that seat, he'd only had 1 and a bit seasons in Formula 1, whereas Sergio, again, this is his 11th year in the sport, so he's got way more experience to draw from, proven entity. And I can only take from 7 races for Pierre because Max missed out on Q3 at Canada 2019 because of that K-Mag crash on the Wall of Champions. Pierre did manage a 12th race before he got dropped, but he was 0.878 behind Max Verstappen at the 2019 Hungarian Grand Prix in qualifying, which would push his average to over 0.7 of a second, which is huge. But the problem is, Checo is still almost half a second behind Max in qualifying. Yes, he's doing a much better job than Pierre, but it's still a lot of time. I mean, let's look at another gap where you've got a team with an established youngster who's kind of baked into that team and a more experienced, older driver who's come in for the first time this year in Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. They've both reached Q3 on 7 occasions this year. The total gap, Carlos has been 1.035 seconds behind Charles Leclerc. If you divide that by 7, the average is 0.148 seconds. Between 1 and 2 tenths, which is 3 times smaller than the gap between Max and Sergio. Now, of course, you can very much argue and very rightly argue that Max, I mean, he definitely gets the priority in terms of upgrades, in terms of focus in that team. I mean, even back in the Daniel Ricciardo era, Daniel's talked about it at length. But ultimately, I can't really blame Red Bull for putting their eggs in that basket because I do think Max is that good. And, I mean, we're seeing it this year. Now he's got the car and he's been very unfortunate to not be leading the title. Let's be real at this stage. It might not be fair on the second driver, but this has always happened in Formula One. And, you know, ultimately it's in the team's best interest to try and maximise the chance of a driver's title, but also a constructor's. So if there's one driver who's, I guess it's difficult, isn't it? From a constructor's point of view, you need both drivers pulling, but at the same time, when one driver's doing so well, you can understand why they've focused their efforts on Max. But couldn't you argue the same for Charles at Ferrari? I mean, he's got his long-term contract. He's, you know, almost the same age as Max, and Carlos is older and wasn't given as long a contract. Like, it would make sense that Ferrari do the same for Charles. Look, ultimately, for Max to be wiping the floor with his teammates like he has for the last 3 years is a combination, if you ask me, of priority treatment, which again, I don't blame Red Bull for, but also the fact he's just that good, if you ask me. He's just that good. But anyway, let's go back to Sergio. Let's focus on Sergio for a bit, who was, and I completely get it, he was, you know, second best driver last year for me, but you can see why he was a lot of people's driver of the year last year. P4 in the Drivers' Championship is mad impressive. Yes, that car was a pink Mercedes and it did take a massive step up relative to 2019, but at the same time, he missed 2 races with the Rona and he still finished P4. If you also strike off his engine failure at Bahrain and his all-pressure issue at Abu Dhabi, he finished in the points in every single race, 13 out of 17 races. He got 2 P4s, he managed a P2 in Istanbul, and of course, the famous Sakir Grand Prix victory, his first in Formula One, a long time coming. It was a no-brainer to sign him. Like, as much as I love Alex Albon, obviously it was the right choice to sign Sergio. You can't let a driver with that talent and that ability. And he finished 2 places ahead of Alex. He finished like 20 points ahead of him in inferior machinery. Like, it had to be Sergio. But at the same time, I always had a feeling that it was going to be a difficult transition for Sergio. You got to remember, he'd been at that Racing Point team, Force India team for 7 years. He was so embedded into that team. He knew that car inside out. He's gone to a new team, completely new environment, completely different expectations, completely different pressure. You know, as much as Sergio's an incredible driver, I think any driver would struggle coming into that, especially with the lack of running drivers get now in terms of pre-season testing relative to back in the day. Coming into that team as a number 2 driver and you know that's your expectation that you have to play ball is going to be difficult. I mean, he said so to Autosport recently. The way you extract lap time in this car, the way you are fighting when you're in dirty air compared to what I was used to and how you drive the races is very different. I went from one team to a very different team in terms of how the car achieved lap time. And it's been harder than expected changing teams, you know, especially coming to a team that is already fighting for the championship. Gone are the David versus Goliath days of when he was at Force India and the expectation was low and the output was high. You know, this is, again, like when he was at McLaren and the expectations were high of him. He was racing alongside Jenson Button in 2013 and it just didn't work out for him because it's a different kettle of fish being able to jump into a top team and deliver when that pressure is on. Both internal pressure from the team, but also external pressure from us, like the public. We expect more when you're at a better team. It's not an easy process, and it's still an ongoing process. Coming into a new structure, a structure like Red Bull, it's very big and it's not easy to find your feet, but it's getting there. He's only raced 11 races at the end of the day. He's picked up a race win. Generally speaking, he's been pretty solid. He's had some shockers, but when you consider the context, I think he's done a decent job. The qualifying pace is a big one because I think his race pace is definitely stronger. If he can sort out his qualifying pace, which I hope he can, I think we could have a pretty solid second driver there. And then there's Pierre Gasly, or should I call him Pierre Gasly 2.0? Because honestly, I think the prospect of Pierre Gasly right now in 2021 is completely different to the prospect of 2019, early 2019 Pierre Gasly. And even Helmut Marko agrees, which, I don't agree with him on much, I'll be honest. In an interview with motorsporttotal.com, Helmut said, Gasly has changed. I had a long conversation with him recently in Graz. He wouldn't react or perform the way he did back at Red Bull Racing. Essentially saying that, if it was Pierre in that seat now, he knows that Pierre would do things differently, would approach it differently, probably get better outcomes for it. Pierre's contract keeps him in that Red Bull family until the end of 2023. But Helmut Marko has also gone on record and said that he's got 2 years now to the end of his contract, the rest of this year and next year, to prove himself, and they'll either promote him to Red Bull or they'll get rid of him. We are looking at his progress, and in the next 2 years, we will make a decision whether he'll be on the free market or whether we'll take him into Red Bull. I mean, my immediate point is, what more can Pierre be doing? Over the last 2 years, again, when you factor in the second half of 2019, all of 2020, and the first 11 races of 2021, I think he's comfortably top 5 drivers on the grid. I might argue a bit higher, maybe. He's been so consistent. So what's best for Red Bull? From their point of view, just thinking about the team, what do I think they should be doing? Because look, it is going to be uncomfortable, the idea of putting Pierre back in that seat, considering how badly wrong it went and the fact that Sergio is doing better than Pierre was doing 2 years ago. But he is a different man now. When he went into that team, he had, I think he had a P4 in a Toro Rosso in 2018 was his best result. But since then, he's stood on every single step of the podium. P3 Baku this year, P2 Brazil 2019, and of course Monza 2020 with that win. Out of 11 races this year, he's qualified in the top 6 8 times. And that's in what? He's at best the 5th best car on the grid, at worst the 7th. And he's very much carrying the team's points haul. I mean, he's on 50, Tsunoda's on 18. Again, I know Tsunoda's a rookie, but Tsunoda's a talented kid and Pierre's just wiping the floor with him. He's more mature, he's faster, and I think, in my opinion, he'd do a way better job if he jumped into that seat now than he did in 2019. Easy. And the thing is, for Red Bull, if they don't give him the opportunity, well, he's not going to stay at AlphaTauri for the rest of his career, because that is the only team on the grid with an enforced ceiling. It's designed to be a number 2 team. They're never going to eclipse Red Bull. Red Bull would never allow that, whereas every other team on the grid, even your Williams, your Haas, your Alfa Romeos, if they had the right personnel and the right collection of circumstance and built an amazing car, they could win titles, but that's never going to happen at AlphaTauri. Yes, they want AlphaTauri to do well, especially as they're now promoting a clothing brand. When it was just Toro Rosso, that's just Italian for Red Bull. So more to gain from that team doing well, and that's probably partly why I think they've maybe kept Pierre in that seat rather than hiking it. Because I mean, back in the day, both of those seats used to pretty consistently be junior drivers. I think there's been a shift. It's up to Red Bull whether that is a junior team still or it's a sister team like Christian has alluded to. I think it's more of a sister team now than it used to be, but their decision on Pierre moving forward and the drivers they subsequently bring in is going to, actions speak louder than words. So does Pierre stay at a team that he knows if he wants to fulfill his ambition of, a world title winner, he's never going to reach in that team? Does he go elsewhere to a team that might be at the moment worse than AlphaTauri, but has a potential ceiling and can build up around Pierre as their kind of focal point, like kind of Max has done at Red Bull, like Seb did at Red Bull as well, like Lewis has done at Mercedes? I mean, look at where McLaren were in 2017 and where they are now, and the change and the improvement in performance, and that's without a massive rules overhaul like we're going to get next year. And also Red Bull have got to think, well, if they do lose Pierre to another team and he ends up going to, say he goes to Williams, right, and they, deliver on what they're talking about in terms of, new investment, they're going to be right up the top. Like, Pierre could end up being a proper thorn in Red Bull's side if they let him go, because he's definitely got the talent to challenge. They've got a very, very talented driver on their hands, but because of the history, they've got to be very careful with how they manage this situation. They don't want to lose out themselves. They don't want to give a rival team a driver who's as good as Pierre can be on his day. And if Red Bull want to win constructors titles, they can't just do it with Max. They need a second driver who's going to be up there. And I know Sergio's only had 11 races, but he's not been anywhere near as close to Max as you look at how close Carlos Sainz has been to Charles Leclerc. How close I think that Russell will probably be to Lewis if they're teammates, which I think they will be. And if Ricciardo does pull it out, which he did eventually at Renault, I think he will get better at McLaren. Him and Norris, there's some good driver pairings out there across the grid, and Red Bull need to be careful they're not just putting all their eggs in the Max Verstappen basket, because no constructors title for you. So what's best for AlphaTauri? Because obviously over the Red Bull kind of family, you've got 4 seats there, but one of those seats is going to be Max Verstappen's for the foreseeable future. So there's 3 opportunities across them 2 teams. Franz Tost, AlphaTauri's team principal, is obviously very keen on keeping Pierre, because clearly Pierre works incredibly well in that environment, in that team. Again, it comes down to, what is Red Bull's approach? Is it a junior team? Is it a sister team? AlphaTauri have got a clothing brand to push. They want to drive revenue and interest in that. But also, again, keeping a driver like Pierre in that seat should, in theory, help the young drivers coming through to sit alongside him, learn from Pierre and build and develop. Although you could argue, the fact that Pierre's beaten out Yuki so convincingly this year, is that actually doing more damage to Yuki than good? But ultimately, a driver who's just driving so well in a team is only going to be helpful for that development, for that moving forward. I do wonder, going into 2022, how much information about these new regs and the car development has been shared by Red Bull and AlphaTauri. But yeah, from their point of view, keep Pierre Gasly for as long as possible, obviously. But then we've talked about what's best for the teams, but then what about for Pierre as an individual, as a human being? Like, what's best for him? Because I don't think that necessarily aligns with what would be best for Red Bull. Again, Red Bull's focus will remain on Max for the foreseeable future. That's that's obviously true, okay? And Pierre needs to understand that if he's going to go to Red Bull, then he is going to be second fiddle. He's not going to get the priority that Max gets. Pierre's got a very similar decision to make now as Daniel did. I know Pierre's at AlphaTauri and is not at Red Bull, but I think the thought process behind that decision is going to be pretty similar. I do wonder if Daniel and Pierre have kind of talked about it, because Daniel's gone on record recently and been very much like, I don't regret leaving Red Bull. I always would have left, even if it wasn't at the end of 2018. If Pierre returns to Red Bull, I think he would do at least as well as Sergio Perez. But another huge point that is important to remember is that going into 2022, all the cars are going to be fundamentally very, very different. Not just for Pierre, not just for Sergio, but for Max as well. So maybe that's the time to chuck Pierre in, because it's more of a level playing field for everyone, including Max. So maybe he won't be as dominant as he has been. But then again, I suppose you can make that same argument for Sergio staying. And Sergio's had this year to get used and settled into the team. I do also think, Pierre is 6 years Sergio's junior. They're at very different places in their, relative careers. I think Sergio would be more inclined to, take a second seat and just play ball. I think Pierre is more likely to push and want more and maybe be a bit more problematic for the team in terms of working with Max. But if the risk pays off and they put Pierre in and he's as good as he has been in the last 2 years and he's close to Max, that is one hell of a driver pairing that, are both in their mid-20s. You know what I actually think, though, Pierre should do? I think Pierre should stay at AlphaTauri for the first season of the new regulations, because it gives him a chance to suss out where all the other teams are relative. If he just keeps solid, stays there, keeps performing well, puts himself even more in the shop window than he already is by smashing it in the first year of the new regulations, then not only might he get offered the Red Bull seat, but also he might get offered lots of other seats. So then back to Checo. What would be Checo's, optimum, ideal point of view? Because again, he's 31, so 6 years older than Pierre, different stage of his career, but still very much in his prime. Like, he proved it last year. Last year was probably his best season in Formula One to date. Helmut Marko has already opened his mouth, obviously, and said that Sergio Perez isn't long-term at Red Bull. To quote, Perez is 31 years now, so he won't be too long in Red Bull racing. But I don't agree with that attitude personally. I mean, look at Sebastian Vettel when he won his 4 world titles. Who was his teammate? Mark Webber. How old was Mark Webber when he joined? Well, he was 30 when he joined, but he turned 31 during his first year at Red Bull Racing. Could Sergio fulfill a Mark Webber role and, support Seb? I know he didn't always play ball with Seb, but having a solid second driver like Mark Webber, who was always there or thereabouts, definitely, I think, benefited Seb and helped Seb's title pushes. Again, there's 2 different ways of going about it. You've got, Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton, who both drivers were pushing and they got the best out of each other. Do you go that route and maybe get Pierre Gasly in to fill kind of a Nico Rosberg style, like probably going to push Max? I think he would push Max eventually. Or do you kind of settle for more of a Mark Webber style? Maybe that's more Sergio Perez, who's more happy to kind of, don't get me wrong, still very, very quick, but more happy decision-making wise to kind of fall into line. Because look, Checo is one of the most well-rounded drivers in Formula One right now. He just is. We saw it last year. Yes, he's having teething problems at Red Bull this year, but don't let that detract from how good Sergio Perez is when he's comfortable, when he's happy on his day. Whatever happens, I think he's guaranteed a seat in Formula One for as long as he wants it, to be honest, whether that's at Red Bull or elsewhere. I mean, he did come so close to losing his seat last year after Racing Point left him in the lurch so late on in the season, yet that just seemed to free him. And the performances he put in after that announcement, they were good all year, but they were mad good. But yeah, I think keep Sergio for 2022, keep Gasly at AlphaTauri for 2022. If Gasly's is still banging him in and Sergio's still kind of where he is now, I think you have to swap him. I get the counter argument, but Pierre is not the same driver he was at the start of 2019. Okay, before we wrap the video up, I'm going to quickly go through what you lot think. I put a poll out on Twitter like almost a week ago now, asking who you think Red Bull should go with for 2022. Like I said, there's a 2/3 to a third split. So 62.8% of you think Sergio Perez should keep the seat for 2022. 33% say Pierre Gasly should take it. And then 4.2% of you think they should look elsewhere. Most of those elsewheres were Bottas or try and hire Russell. I mean, Russell would be great, but Mercedes not going to let that happen, are they? I picked out some comments as well, so starting with those who are pro Checo. Carolina De Villa, 97, says, Checo is the best option because he's willing to be Max's squire. Since arriving at Red Bull Racing, he understood he has to be the number 2. Which is, again, a good point. Sergio, I think, knows where he stands and is going to be more happy. I feel like, given where they are relative in their careers, Pierre is more likely to want to push forward. Sergio's more likely to kind of play ball, I think. At Big Block 111 said, give Perez at least another year before making changes. Red Bull never gives them time to adapt to the new car/team fully. Same reason, it's no wonder you have no skilled workers if you fire every employee after 2 weeks. Is Red Bull's high driver turnover hurting them? You could definitely make an argument to say yes. Since 2013, over the course of 9 seasons, they've had 8 different drivers at that Red Bull team. Vettel, Webber, Ricciardo, Verstappen, Kvyat, Gasly, Albon, and now Perez. Mercedes, in the same time period, have had 3 Hamilton, Rosberg, Bottas. And who's won all the drivers' titles and all the world championships? At Dan_C 1990 says Perez, just purely because I wouldn't want to see Gasly obsess over the data like he did the first time around, and being driver number 2 alongside Verstappen isn't a place I'd really want to be as a young driver. Fine for a more experienced driver though. But it's an interesting point you make around like the data. There's definitely something about how Pierre approached that in 2019. I definitely don't think Pierre is exempt of any blame for how badly 2019 went. I don't think it's just his fault. I've heard stories of how Pierre conducted himself, and he went in wanting to change a lot of things as far as I've heard. Maybe wasn't as malleable as he could have been and threw his weight around a bit too much. I hope he hasn't burnt any irredeemable bridges, but there were some issues. At Major Gamer says Marco would never be able to swallow his pride and bring Gasly back. I really hope something as petty as a man's pride wouldn't get in the way of making the right decision by both the driver and the team. But then it is Helmut Marko, so who knows? And as for the pro Gasly responses, at Alex47207117 says Gasly deserves a fair chance at Red Bull. He has more experience and the Red Bull is more stable than in 2019. Car stability is an interesting point. I think we've definitely seen a car this year that isn't as twitchy. Max isn't making as many errors, which I think is credit to him for improving as a driver, but also I think the car, look at testing. Both drivers complained of it last year and in 2019. I do agree that I think the car overall is more stable than it was back then. At AQT1234 says Gasly, Sergio seems to be extremely inconsistent as of now, while Pierre seems very consistent. Obviously, Pierre felt pressure in 2019, but I think that the Pierre we have now is something else. I agree that Pierre now is something else. And yeah, obviously on the face of it, Sergio's been way more inconsistent than Pierre, but Sergio's had 11 races in that team. Pierre's had 63 races at Toro Rosso Alpha Tauri, and Perez is coming off of 7 years at the same team. So it's going to take adjustment. I don't think we can read too much into that right now. At Robotic Hamster 2 says, get Pierre in the car. Should be a bit easier given it's a completely new car next year and everyone is in the same boat. Again, yes, new car next year. It's going to be a bit of a reset for everyone. And everyone's going to be getting used to these new car packages. It's not going to be an evolution where you can carry over a lot of the techniques and driving style that you did from a previous year. The cars are going to be completely different. So I think that could equally benefit Sergio, though. I think that gives Pierre a better chance of doing well, but also it gives Sergio a better chance of maybe catching up to Max a bit. But there we go. I'm done. Please let me know in the comments below your thoughts. Is it worth the risk of going for Pierre again? Because honestly, I think the payoff could be amazing. Also, shout out to, my boy Aldas. He put this video out 2 days ago. I've been working on this video for a while now, and I saw that pop up and I was like, cheers Aldas. So now I've got to get this out on Friday. But yeah, I'll put a link to Aldas's version of this video, his perspective on things above. So give that a click. And yeah, we're done. Make sure you drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. If you didn't, then just dislike it if you want. It's up to you. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. My name's been Tommo, as it typically is. I still don't feel very well, but yeah. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.